Welcome. My name is Joe Pepraki, and I'm the National Consultant for Faith Formation at Loyola Press, a Jesuit ministry in Chicago. And welcome to this webinar, Strengthening the Bonds Between Young and Old, the Sharing the Wisdom of Time Roundtable discussion. I'm privileged to host and facilitate this conversation today, and this webinar is based on the book that Loyola Press published called Sharing the Wisdom of Time. And this book was part of the initiative of our Holy Father, Pope Francis, as he has sought to bring attention to our elderly, our elders in our society, and to bridge the gap between generations and to strengthen that bond between young and old. The book was also then an inspiration for a Netflix series. How about that? It was on Christmas Day, and it's a 4-part series. And just to read what it describes there, it's in candid and heartwarming stories, inspiring women and men over 70 share poignant life lessons and pivotal choices from their remarkable journeys. And so it's a wonderful series, and you can find that, check your local listings, check with Netflix, check with your on-demand, and you should be able to watch that. But today we have with us 4 people who were key players in making this book a reality. And it's my pleasure to introduce them to you one at a time, starting in the upper left. And of course, they're on your right too in their live shots. Tom Mcgrath, a good friend of mine. We've worked together for a number of years at Loyola Press. He is now enjoying retirement. You look like you're enjoying it, Tom.
Definitely.
After a deeply satisfying 42-year career in Catholic publishing, having worked on U.S. Catholic, At Home with Our Faith, Vision, Prepare the Word, and Loyola Press curricula and trade books, Tom was privileged to share project managing editor duties with Rosemary Lane on Sharing the Wisdom of Time. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Doing great, Joe. It's great to be here with all of you.
Wonderful. Thanks for spending this time with us. So your cohort in not in crime, but in creativity, Rosemary Lane is the Director of Editorial Services at Georgetown University. And previously she worked as a writer, editor, and storyteller at Boeing and Loyola Press. And she served as co-editor of the book Sharing the Wisdom of Time, and she's forever grateful for the opportunity to soak up elders' wisdom. Hi, Rosemary. How you doing?
Hey, Joe. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today.
And you're coming to us from DC, is that correct?
I am from rainy, chilly DC. Yeah.
Rainy and chilly. Okay. Oh, hang in there. Stay dry. Next, I'd like to introduce Paul Audia. He has been photographing and producing videos since the 1980s. His broad range, lust for life and people in it brought him to what he calls the most important job of his being, photographing for the book, Sharing the Wisdom of Time. And Audia's part of the photography was the United States and Europe. Paul, how are you?
Awesome. Thank you much for having me on this esteemed group of people.
Absolutely. And you add to the esteem, that's for sure. We can't wait to
Thank
hear
you.
from you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Jill Arena, also another co-worker of mine who's still at Loyola Press with me. She is the manager of design at Loyola Press. She's enjoyed a 30-year career, must have started when you were 8 years old, in art direction and illustration and creative development. And Jill was the creative lead, art director, and graphic designer for Sharing the Wisdom of Time. How you doing today, Jill?
Great. Thanks for having me and letting us share some of the background stories.
Fantastic. We are, what a panel. As our former president emeritus at Loyola Press, Father George Lane, used to say, what a team. What a team. And so let's jump into talking about how this book came to be. And so, Tom, I'd like to start with you to start answering this question of, how did the Sharing the Wisdom of time come to be. But tell us who you're practicing what you preach in this picture here. You seem to be sharing the wisdom of time with a little fella here. Who is this?
That happens to be my wonderful grandson, Emilio Thomas. And this was up in Paw Paw, Michigan on vacation last summer, but I asked you to put up this photo because it captures a number of things that we're talking about today. And in fact, reminds me of a responsibility I have, which is something Pope Francis said was the elderly are entrusted with a great responsibility to transmit their life experience, their family history, and the history of a community, of a people. So that's part of my responsibility now, my spiritual tasks, sharing what I know, what little there might be, to my grandkids.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty there, Tom. And I would imagine mixed in with that is a little corny humor as well as wisdom.
That's the main method I use.
Absolutely. Well, that's a beautiful picture, Tom. And I mean it that you're practicing what you preach. And I'm having that experience now with 4 grandchildren. That's just a beautiful thing, you know, to have these opportunities. I personally remember at Christmas time, my grandson Patrick crawling by the Christmas tree and pointing to the nativity set under it and laying there saying, "What's this?" And then I would lay on the ground with him and tell him the story of the nativity. And boy, that just is a special feeling to share that wisdom with our young people, isn't it, Tom?
It's a real privilege. It definitely is. And I think the Pope realized that too, because, you know, when we talk about this book, this is the Pope's idea. This is the Pope's idea, not only for a book, but for a whole movement. In fact, he said shortly after this experience he had in prayer, he said, "I feel that this is what the Lord wants me to say. There should be an alliance between young and old people." And he said that because he felt that alliance that had seemed so natural was starting to fade. And in many places, elders were being marginalized, cut adrift, turned almost invisible. So,
yeah. And then, so as you and the army of people at Loyola Press took on this project, you had some goals in mind, right, for making this happen the way you wanted it to happen.
we did, you know, when they ask, you know, how did this become a book? It's a great story. The idea came to Pope Francis in prayer, and he asked a colleague, a mutual colleague of ours, Father Antonio Spadaro, a Jesuit, reach out to us to see if we would be willing to work on a book that had come to Pope Francis in prayer. And of course we said, when do we start? We couldn't wait. We had already had a great success with Dear Pope Francis, a book we had suggested to Pope Francis, in which he would answer questions of children from around the world. And that had reached the New York Times bestseller list. So we had had some success working together. And so when Father Spadaro came asking if we were interested, we said, of course. And so that's what we found out, though. It was a very different demographic trying to work with and reach. Because like with kids, you just throw some crayons and a sheet of paper down, and 12 minutes later, they got, here's my question for the Pope, and it's all illustrated and all. But with elders, so many are they don't think they have that wisdom. And so we thought, how are we going to find them and draw that out in them? And so as we were looking in long conversations after we had some initial attempts to solicit reflections from elders, we came up with 4 guiding principles that helped produce the book we knew Pope Francis was calling for. And that is, number 1, diversity. We committed to gathering contributions from elders all around the globe.
Certainly.
The second was tone, and this is a really important one. We wanted to create a kind of conversation between Pope Francis and the elders. And here you see this picture of Pope Francis. He's reading the reflection of one of the sisters, a nun, Sister Gilchrist from Norway, a Trappistine nun. The next one is appreciation. We wanted to showcase the dignity and the nobility of the elders, who often feel marginalized or even invisible. And the final one is that we wanted to dig to the depth or as the Jesuits would say, the majas, the more. We wanted to help elders move beyond platitudes to tell the real stories behind the great wisdom that they had gained in life. Stories complete with messiness and grit. And of course, there was plenty of that. And boy, did they respond.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Pope Francis did have a conversation with them. He responds throughout the book, doesn't he?
Well, he does. He responds in three different ways. He responds first as like the Pope. His preface is like it's like a letter from the Pope to the world. And then he also responds as an elder, as a fellow elder. He shares his memories of other elders who taught him what it was like to be wise and how they shared their wisdom. And then thirdly, he responded directly to not everybody, but to a lot of the people and with practical responses from them. So we were really fortunate to have a lot from him. And so even with our, when we came to this a certain point where we had it all together, but we soon realized that we needed more help in locating the diversity of elders we were seeking.
Yeah, how did you find people all over the world? I mean, did you get the phone book and just flip pages? And how do you do that?
Right. Yeah, any Catholic name we could find. And gratefully, we knew what we needed to do, but we didn't know exactly how. Okay. And so my partner in Unbound and this partner in this project, Sharing the Wisdom of Time, Rosemary Lane, came up with a brilliant solution for that. And I'm just going to turn to Rosemary and say, why don't you tell us about the Unbound Connection and how it played out for us?
Yeah, so thanks, Tom. I think you hit the nail on the head. We really had two main challenges going into making this book. And the first was exactly what Tom said. How do we find elders all over the globe that reflect Pope Francis's diverse global audience? And then once we find those elders, how do we invite them to share the most intimate parts of their lives with us that they might not share with other people around them? Because we were looking for really authentic stories, like Tom said, about love and heartbreak and loss and grief. So how do we invite that trust? So we had two partners that were really invaluable, and we call them the godsend of the book because they were. And the first was Unbound. And Unbound, which you can see here on this slide, is a global nonprofit sponsorship company, and they connect sponsors with children and elders around the world in 19 countries. Okay. So what that meant for us was that they had boots on the ground. They had videographers, the reporters, the editors, the translators there. But I think more importantly, they had really built-in established relationships with the elders that they were serving that they had built for years and years and years. Yeah. So we had a lot of meetings with them to make sure that we were on the same page with our missions and that we're going to treat these stories with reverence.
And I understand that the young lady up in the upper left was quite instrumental. Is she almost like the contact person?
Yeah, Jennifer, she was one of our guides in Colombia, and she also was invited to ask Pope Francis a question when we debuted the Book of the Vatican. So it was wonderful. So you can see on these slides, we have elders from Uganda. In the bottom right, Elisa was a 100-year-old midwife from Guatemala who had delivered 10,000 babies. So we just never would have been able to find these stories without Unbound. They were really instrumental.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was good. And then our second partner, we do want to mention too, we had a really robust network of Jesuit publishers around the world. Right. So we asked them if they could bring us stories from their region, and then we placed those in the book as well. And then they published the book in their languages too. So it really was a global team effort. We couldn't have done it without those two partners.
Yeah, and you're right about if you're looking for an organization that is spread throughout the world, the Jesuits certainly have fingerprints all over the world in terms of their ministries. And so it was great to rely on Jesuit publishers and Unbound. And so that resulted in quite a bit of traveling then. You mentioned locations in Africa and so on. And I have a map here that Paul sent me that just shows an itinerary from Europe. And I'm going to ask Paul to say something about that in a minute. But before that, Jill, you being the person at Loyola Press who had to find a photographer willing to do this, how did you find Paul and convince him to fly all over Europe to take these pictures?
Well, the convincing wasn't too hard. Take a European trip. But that being said, so I worked with Paul for many years. One of my first jobs out of school was at Marshall Fields. I was an art director there, and I had worked with Paul for many, many years. And we had such a good working relationship that it was just, I knew how he connects with people and how he would be perfect for this project. So
that's great. And then Paul, what were you thinking when you said yes, knowing that it was going to turn out looking like this map here? I mean, what was that experience like? Have you ever traveled that much for one project before?
I have done some Nat Geo things before, so I have traveled a good bit. I might want to mention one thing before we go any farther. We did get someone's speaker might be up a little too high that's on our team. And we're getting
I think our team, we're going to need to mute when we're not talking, because we are getting some feedback.
But anyway, so what was the question? How did I do that?
See, now I had to unmute because
okay.
Tell us about your reaction to Jill's invitation to fly around the world taking these pictures.
I think it's right up my alley. I mean, I was in my element. So to put it together, this adventure was made for me. So I know it's a little off of what I normally have done, but it was interesting, and I can't talk high enough about the people that I've worked with, from Loyola, and the support they gave me too. So
yeah. And I know each of you has commented in your own way during our preparations that this experience really impacted you profoundly, and so we want to talk about that on a personal level. How this whole experience impacted you on a personal level. So Rosemary, why don't you get this started and tell us a little bit about the personal impact that this whole project had on you. And I'll ask Paul and Jill to mute ourselves while she's talking, so we're not getting that feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And let me know in the chat if anything is hard to hear. Happy to adjust. But thanks for inviting me to share. So yeah, I think Tom was saying at the very beginning of this conversation that Pope Francis really wanted young people to have a roadmap and a guide of sorts to guide their lives. And that was through elders and through elders' stories and through their wisdom. And so I think, I didn't know at the time, but I was really living that in real time, gaining that wisdom as I was going through this process. So when I was working on this book, it was a really formative time in my life. I was in my late 20s. I knew where I wanted to end up in life, but I had no clue how to get there. And I think I just felt totally stuck and rudderless and just filled with a lot of uncertainty. So I think to be able to spend my days connecting with elders who were at this point that I wanted to be at and ask them the questions that were for the book, but were really on my heart and things I really wanted to know was very invaluable. So as I was asking elders questions, I thought a lot about my own grandmother, who you can see in this picture. And I used to ask her all the same questions I'd ask these elders. And I had lived with her. And every night I would just pound her with questions and be like, how did you know, Grandpa was the one? How did you know you'd want to have 11 kids? How did you know you'd move? And I'm sure I was so annoying, but she would just kind of like swat me away every time and be like, I don't know. I just lived it. I just did it. And I think, at that point in my life, I wanted answers, right? I wanted, what do I do? And I wanted the sound bites that I was looking for in my interviews with elders. So I kept thinking about her as I did this book, and I kept asking these questions. I got to ask Pope Francis a question, which was fantastic, and be able to to ask him what I was wondering about with all this uncertainty, and the wisest elder in the world when we presented the book to him. And that was,
tell us a little bit more about that experience that you were able to meet the Holy Father close up and ask him a question.
yeah, that was such a privilege. So different young people were invited to ask the Pope one question when we launched the book at the Vatican in 2018. And so I stood there and I asked him what I've been asking elders, how can you trust that your deepest desires will be fulfilled in the face of so much uncertainty? And I was able to sit back and receive advice from him. And so the experience was very formative. And I think when I look back now and I look at those stories as a whole, I can see that they're not stories about what elders did to get to a certain point. All these stories are stories about how they lived, and how they lived with such faith and such hope in the face of undaunting challenges, and lived fully alive lives to get to where they were.
Yeah, this is a picture of you. I love the look on your face, Rosemary. I mean, such compassion and love that you're showing to this woman. Tell us a little bit about this encounter.
Yeah, this was at a nursing care facility outside Medellin in Colombia. We were invited there with Unbound to go. And Tom had talked about earlier elders being hidden. This quite literally was hidden. We didn't even know there was a doorway there. And then you open it up and there was all of these elders ministered by this nun here. And so that was really a guiding principle of this whole project, just to shed light on elders. But I think just in closing, I think the project helped me see my own grandmother in a new light, because she's somebody who gave me all the answers she needed through the way she lived and how she lived. And she had 90 plus grandchildren. We're all spread out all over the country, and sort of living, the shared values that she imbued in us. So I hope that this book, gives people the answers that they're looking for, that it gave me, but that it also inspires them to reach out to elders in their own lives and find those answers that might be unexpected, but that they're
absolutely there. That's beautiful, Rosemary. Thanks for sharing. And again, I love the looks on the faces. We're going to be talking about that in a little while. And this is one in particular that I know Tom asked me to share. And Tom, you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience of meeting Father Desmond O'Grady. So make sure you unmute yourself, Tom, as we ask you to come back on and share a little bit about the personal impact that this encounter had on you.
Yeah. Well, when you asked what affected me personally, the deepest, I thought the biggest impact was the stories of the elders. All of them blew me away. As I read and reread them, I was always deeply moved. And the elders, as Rosemary pointed to, they showed such resilience in the face of life and death struggles, and they kept deep faith that carried them through, and the love that they had for those around them, their families, etc., helped them endure. So, and one example really is Father Desmond O'Grady, a Jesuit in Ireland, and here he is in this amazing photo. When he was interviewed, he was actually experiencing the early stages of Alzheimer's. And what struck me was his humble acceptance of this new reality for him. He recognized there were things he could no longer do, and yet he didn't quit. He became a chaplain, actually, at an institute for the criminally insane. And his openness and vulnerability disarmed the men that he was serving, and they, in turn, opened up about their own challenges. I know that Father Desmond's acceptance of his condition and his willingness to be vulnerable about it became a source of grace to many people. And I know he's been an inspiration to me, because as now I'm in my 70s, I experienced my own limitations and losses. And like so many other elders in the book, Father Desmond pointed the way beyond loss, beyond pain, to wisdom and meaning and actually joy. So, but this photo is amazing. And maybe Paul should talk a little bit about how it came to be, or Jill.
Absolutely.
I can. So you gave me a good intro. it was interesting because I only knew a little bit about a few of the, I tried to know as much about the story as I could without letting it influence the way I was going to photograph. And I didn't have anything set up until I actually got there. So Father Desmond, most elders are a little reluctant, when they see this crazy looking guy come walking in with a camera. So we sat and we chatted for the longest time. And I had a good feeling for, I had known a little bit about him. My mother had passed away with dementia. So I connected with him very quickly. And during that process, you can almost feel that you're enclosed inside of your own self when this comes up. And this is what brought me to this image, just the communication between the elders and Father Desmond, obviously very intelligent, understands what he's doing and why he's doing it. But that's why this picture to me kind of resonated, along with the his personality per se.
It's a very poignant picture. I know as I look at it, you get a sense that he's looking at something, but he's looking beyond something, and he's looking to the past as well. And Jill, what do you see as you look in that picture?
Well, I mean, I think this is a perfect example, of when a good portrait is a window into the soul of its subject. I look at this, when I look at this photo in the book, it tells a story and makes me want to read about Desmond. I want to find out why is he looking through that window? Is he sad? Is he happy? Is he, it's and looking through a window is such a metaphor to life. And I think Paul was really able to capture that. You had asked, how did it affect you personally?
Yeah.
This working on this book. I had the opportunity to sit in the room with a Holocaust survivor, and he was telling me his story about one of the most horrific events in our history. And I just had this great responsibility that we needed to honor their stories visually. And I think that's what we did. Bringing Paul on and Unbound's photographs. I mean, they really just elevated and told a story. They mirrored the story that was in the copy. So
Well, and that resonates with me because I'm a very visual person, Jill, and I love books with pictures in them. Ever since I was a kid, I loved storybooks that had huge pictures. And now as an adult, a book like Sharing the Wisdom of Time speaks to me because I love to see those visuals. And you are an image person. You're in charge of our image department, so to speak, at Loyola Press. Anything that has to do with images, you're involved. So tell us about the importance of images in this book. It could have just been written word, but that is definitely not the approach Loyola Press took. Talk about the power of images.
Let me step back a little bit.
Okay.
On the original inception of this book, it was going to be like a magazine format, and we were going to have the elders send in selfies of themselves.
Okay.
And then the stories started rolling in, and they were so powerful. We knew we came to a visual realization that we needed to change things up, and we needed to elevate these photos. So that's when we reached out to Paul Audia, and my relationship with him, working with him. I knew we were going to get that connection that we needed in the photography.
And it certainly happened. And so talk a little bit about some of the images that you selected as just being particularly striking to you, starting with you, Jill.
Yeah, so this is a shot of Erwin Froman. He's the Holocaust survivor. And he felt really uncomfortable telling his story into the lens of a camera.
Okay.
So Paul positioned me behind the camera so that as he was talking, it became a conversation. And Paul was able to capture that connection between us. And that's when a portrait becomes more than just a face in a frame.
Yeah.
Erwin shared his experience as a child, getting loaded onto the cattle cars. And then, as when they reached Auschwitz, all the chaos and, the German shepherds barking and the soldiers yelling. His last memory was holding his father's hand and the butt of a soldier's rifle coming down onto his shoulder. And in the book, in large quotes, it says, "I can still feel my father's hand leaving mine."
Wow.
And it's just incredibly powerful.
It certainly is. I mean, I know even in our rehearsals, we had to occasionally grab the Kleenex because these stories and these images touch you very deeply, and you folks got very close to these people as well. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I think it's, oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead,
No,
Rosemary.
you go ahead, Rosemary.
I was just going to say, this is a testament to Paul where
Can I ask Jill and Paul to mute, please? Go ahead, Rosemary.
We really sent Paul on a wild goose chase, like that photo we showed in the beginning that was the scrawling over Europe. I mean, we just said, go to, Ireland one day, the next day we need you in Sicily, with very little direction. And he was able to show up in people's homes without speaking the language and then capture their essence and their full humanity. And that was just such a perfect, wonderful compliment to the stories and these moving stories that we're telling. And you can see with Erwin, like the hands and the face and what he's seen. So Paul was just such a wonderful gift to this project.
Absolutely. Paul, you were going to add a few thoughts about this as well.
When we talk about some of the most influential people in the book that I met, all of them had a story. All of them influenced me, but there are a few that I remember that stand out. Erwin was one of them, and we ended up becoming friends. And before he passed away, I 2 weeks before that, I went up to see him. But let's go back to the photography part, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the goal in my mind wasn't to be a portraiture. It was had to have something that talked about and portrayed what these people have been through, and the message that they were trying to get across. So I took this book very seriously. And everyone has given me something more in return that I met than what I gave photographically, I think.
Oh, that definitely comes out, and just the images as you go through the book, they are of real people who had very profound stories, and yet a number of them are also just very simple stories of people who have lived a long time. But you folks got to connect on a very personal level, and I'm going to ask you, Paul, to continue reflect on that a little bit more. Tell us about the experience of encountering the elders. Now, we've talked about the images and how the images speak to you, but you spent time, as that previous one of those previous photos was showing, you spent time with these people. Tell us about that experience of encountering the elders throughout this project.
I was on a high the whole time, of life.
Yeah.
I learned so much about the Holocaust, about what people have been through. And I think the Pope was right on and thinking and getting, the connection between the person that was photographing video, to continue with the Netflix series, because there's something about this personal connection, this one-on-one thing, where it's almost impossible to deny what they've been through. And it leads me and other people that have met them, read the book, on another journey of life. Amazing. So kudos for the Pope for making it happen. But it's just an amazing, I could go through and tell you stories about everyone that I met. And I don't know if we got enough time for that.
Well, to tell us about what what we're looking at here. This is actually you taking pictures of Tom.
Tom who?
That's Tom's Fabio shot.
I think that's the raccoon down there.
Oh,
Underneath.
okay.
There were,
But Tom, I want to ask you a question, Tom, if I might. You know, if you were at that photograph that I saw with your grandson. So let's go back a little bit. If you were to tell young people, your grandson, someone that you know, one thing about life that you've learned, what would that one thing be?
Forgive early and often.
I think that's excellent, because that's what I encountered throughout everyone that I photographed, met, and not just in the book itself, but all the people that are involved in this. It was about forgetting. I mean, the Holocaust survivor, people can, I mean, they can be angry about things. People are angry today, but everyone that we met, that I met, had that same overtone. You know, you can't harbor bad feelings.
And one of the things that happened throughout, you were alluding to during our meetings and our rehearsals and so on. You talked a lot about trust, Paul, and the photos we're looking at right now, as we can tell, it has something to do with this unique hat that you're wearing. What was the role of these pictures that you took, which don't appear in the book? These are, as far as I know, these are pictures that you just took like after the shoots, but you said it had something to do with building relationships.
Relationships and trust, because these people don't know me. You know, they only heard from me from Loyola, the other people in Loyola from the different countries. And so I had to build up a trust factor first. And that was without my camera in my hand. I wanted to know their story. I wanted to learn what they learned, so that I could continue to tell anyone that'll listen to me to go read the book, go watch the movie, you know.
Yeah.
So, but after we were done, you know, and I think I gained their trust, part of it was just a fun thing.
Yeah.
And you would not believe how people changed when I put this hat and these glasses on them. I mean, you
look
could
at
look
the
at their
faces,
faces.
the smiles are incredible.
Yeah, and so it's interesting how people are and how they react to certain things. And this was just a building. I got everybody but Martin Scorsese, I think, to wear my hat, though.
He drew the line there.
He drew the line there.
Sure. Well, that's just a great part of the story that we wanted to share with people. And I know that, you know, encountering these people impacted all of you on a very personal level. And Tom, you wanted to talk a little bit about the encounter that you had with Francesco. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, actually, I would do want to do that, but I want to say before we get off the topic of the visual and the decision that was made, I just want to say I'm glad that I wasn't more stubborn than I tend to be, because I was holding the budget. And then every day, Rosemary and Jill would come in with another plan, more extravagant thing. And all I got to say is that they were right, you were right. It was the best decision I made about this at all, was to say yes to you guys.
Wonderful.
But if you see the young man and the older man, this is a grandfather and his grandson, Francesco Infantino, and Alessio is the younger man. Alessio was in the book of the Dear Pope Francis book.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually asked a great question of Pope Francis, and Pope Francis mentions it in this book. But and he was a sweet young man, and what I wanted to say about this photo is I think it captures the message that Pope Francis had in mind. This is a blessing going on. In both of the pictures, the one where the grandpa's just playing checkers, that's a blessing for his grandson. But this one is like the intentional blessing. I almost feel like, you know, Abraham and Isaac here.
Yeah.
That the grandpa's saying, I see you. I see the potential in you. I see the goodness of you. I also see you're worried, fearful about the future. And I want you to know that you can always have more faith in your faith than you do in your doubts, and you will be okay. I just think I love this photo, and I always thought, it showed me here how Alessio came to be such a fine young man that we had met just about 4 or 5 years earlier.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about this as a blessing, of letting your gaze fall upon someone. Again, as a grandfather now, and Tom, I'm sure you can relate to this. How often do we hear our grandkids say, "Grandpa," or they call me Bumpa? Look at me, look at. They do this with parents too. I remember being at the airport one time, and there was a little child running around and then climbing something and said, "Mommy, mommy, look, mommy, look." They just want our eyes to fall upon them. And when we do that with a gaze of approval, that's a blessing, because then they feel like, and you think in scripture of how the Jewish people said, "Lord, let your face shine upon us." And here's what Francesco is doing. Just a beautiful way of describing a blessing, Tom.
And he's being blessed as well, because there he sees the very future right in front of him, and he doesn't have to worry about his waning days, because there's the future. I mean, it's a mutually beneficial blessing.
It certainly is. I'm just going to show pictures and ask any of you to jump in. I'm not even going to pose a question.
I can jump in on this one because I have such a soft spot for Joe Schneider.
Okay.
He's the only elder who appears twice in the book. We have him in our love section where he's reflecting on his marriage to his late wife. And in this photo, this is in the death section. And so Joe was a bomber pilot in World War II, and they called him a bridge buster because he had to fly really low over targets in Italy, and it made him a very easily target. So every day before he'd take off, he'd say a prayer, and because he didn't know if he'd be alive in the next 5 minutes. And he had to do that 72 times. So when we talked to him, he was sort of in disbelief that he was turning 98. He was on the precipice of another birthday after experiencing so much death at a very young age. But I think for Joe, his faith was rock solid, and that's what got him through those times. He says in the book, God was my co-pilot, my helpmate, was everything I needed. So I think in this picture, you can really see that this man has seen things. He's stared down death, but he has this clear-eyed vision and just rock solid faith to me that Paul was able to capture in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, Rosemary. And I actually, when I taking notes on these, I wrote down on this one, you can't see my writing there, but I wrote down "The Story in Your Eyes." It's a song by the Moody Blues. But that's what I thought of when I saw this and so many other pictures, that there is a story in this gentleman's eyes, and you just said how he faced death, and you can see that somehow in his eyes. That's just so profound.
Yeah, it really is. And Joe passed away 10 months after the book was published, but he was able to see it, and I'm so glad we were able to capture him.
Yeah, let me do the same with this image. I have no question. I just want someone to jump in and talk.
Berta. She was one of the coolest women I've ever met. I didn't speak, before I go any further, I need to thank, I feel like, yes, did I photograph a lot of this? Yes, but I had help along the way, whether it was from a stranger, whether it was from my family, whether it was from the people from Loyola. I had a lot I want to make sure that I have time to say that to everyone, and including in Slovenia. So I get there, I'm lost, of course. I got lost more than I think I was not lost, but anyway, so I found the place, go inside. She has all of these little knickknacks all around her house, and she was a teacher. She taught children that were troubled children that had problems. And one of the things that during the course of the conversation, she said that I said, "How did you manage to do that?" And she said, "I gave him respect." and they never had respect at home. And that's how you make that first connection. And I thought, oh, I'm getting chills just thinking about it,
Yeah.
And so we walked around the house. I listened to her stories. She offered me these cookies that are on the, on the tray.
I'm
and
salivating at them right now as we speak.
I'm kind of hungry. So we went over there. I said, oh my gosh, would you sit down there for a second? And so she was just, she laughed. She was such a wonderful and joyous person that this to me, again, it's not about a portrait. It's about the person themselves and how can I connect with them and make the intimacy of a photograph that tells there's true stories of themselves.
Well, and you certainly did that. Go ahead, Rosemary.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you go back one, it's an interesting juxtaposition that Paul captured because it's this light, lively photo, but in her story, she's talking about working with really troubled, violent youth. But her message that she said is she has this beautiful line, like the face of love, even if it's blue, can be nothing other than the face of God. And so you can see that she carries that joy throughout her work. And
Thank you.
And in both shots, I mean, subtly, I don't know if you catch this, but she's welcoming you into her home. In both shots, the window, the open window, like all the little candies and food. I mean, I just want to go sit down and talk to her.
I know that's the thing that struck me is that both of these pictures are just so simple. I mean, this is everyday life. It's just her home. And so, yes, there are deep and profound stories, but there's so much simplicity in here too. I wanted to ask one of you to comment on this picture of Joseph, which I love because my name is Joseph, of course, and my dad, when I was little, he used to tease me sometimes if he wanted to get my attention, he would say, Joseph. So as soon as I saw Joseph Wolski, but there was something that happened with the shoot and with this dog jumping up on his lap. Can someone give a little 60-second version of that story, Jill?
Yeah, so you can see in the smaller inset shot, the little dog, wanting to be a part of the shoot. And they kept shooing him away the entire shoot until the very end. They're like, okay, let the dog jump up on his lap. And that's the larger shot here. This is the one shot I have where, Joseph is really smiling and he seems so happy and he's hanging out with his dog. I love that story. But Paul can tell you more about this Joseph story.
It was in, and I'm going to try to pronounce it right again, Joe.
Okay.
Pruskov. My neighbor was trying to help me with that.
Did it good.
So I bet you it's close, but it's not right.
Dobja, it means good.
So the language barrier was a little bit tough, but the grandson that was there spoke really English really well, and he translated a lot of the questions. Now, at this point, I think we had electricity. Oh no, wait, it was the shot down there. We got electricity. Everything else, I got there in the rain. I went from sunny Venice to Poland, Warsaw, drove over in the rain. Anyway, we get to the house. The only thing that's lit up at this point is the fireplace and a few candles that he has. Okay. So luckily I had, portable flash equipment, but the stuff that was so amazing about him and the stories in detail. I mean, I spent probably more time with him because I didn't want to leave because, and it just the things that he talks about in the book and outside of the book. He wrote one himself and just an amazing character. And he held no animosity towards the people that persecuted, killed his father. And
I think it wasn't a single gunshot. His
gunshot
was about to be shot, and then his sister jumped in front to stop at a single gunshot.
And then him and his mother lived on the streets for 2 years after that.
Wow.
until he got back into high school and graduated with, and he still continued to help other people, which I thought was amazing. So
yeah, I love the shot. I love the dog, and then the smile on Josef's face is just priceless. And I have to say, we really had a hard time trying to figure out which images to share, but I know all four of you agreed this was the last one that you wanted to share. And Tom, can you comment a little bit about this gentleman's name is Cassius, and why is it that the four of you thought, let's end with this picture? There's something about his face, and you talked about dignity.
Yeah.
Tell us what you're thinking.
Well, yeah, there's so much to this man. He's just, Cassius is a noble person. And he was actually one of the first that we interviewed. And through his story, we really got a sense of, we can do this book.
Okay.
He told a tough story about he moved into a non-integrated neighborhood, first Black family, and kids were teasing and taunting his daughter and throwing rocks at them. And he went out in the street with a bullhorn and said, "We are here. We don't mean anybody any harm. We're going to live our lives. We're going to stay here. Get used to it." And then, he just had a very strong presence. And yet it was like, just the power of goodness and nonviolence. It was just just a very interesting man, got us off to a great start. And I know other people have other things to say about him too. I remember Joel and Cicerelli, our president of Loyola Press, interviewed him. And that got us off to a good start.
Absolutely.
I can continue
Paul?
to talk. He's one of the another one that was very influential. I mean, they all were, but I would have to say Cassius, again, we spoke, we went into his house. I just talked to him and his wife. I tried to get a feel for the story. We brought a bicycle outside and took some photographs there. But the one that was the deepest to me was that this man had been through a lot of troubled past. He grew up, he raised children, and he protected them in a way. And one of the things to include what you said, Tom, he, at the end of the conversation with the bullhorn, telling everybody he was staying there, he said, "If anyone has anything to say, let's talk about this right now. Let's get together and talk about the problems that we're having." And at least that's what he told me. So it's just, and I've stayed in contact with him too. And I need to call him again, but he's just
Please
amazing.
do, and update us. Let us know how Cassius is doing. Just it's a wonderful picture to wrap up with, and a story to tell. And we have a little less than 10 minutes left, and we invited our participants, and I'll invite you now again, if you have questions for our four panelists, to go into the chat and to enter some questions there. But the first question I'll toss out, and again, any one of you just unmute, and first, the fastest one gets to answer the question sometimes, but someone wanted to ask, how long did the whole process of making the book take? I mean, this couldn't have been done overnight.
Tom, you might, I was trying to remember the number when I saw that question come in. Thanks for asking. I think maybe 2 years total. Tom, would you agree?
I think so, from the original conversation with Father Spadaro, and 2 years. And we really put it on a fast track too, considering all that we had to accomplish, but 2 years.
And so a lot of gratitude to Loyola Press for entrusting a team to spend so much time on a book. On
a real labor of love, that's for sure. And I remember when you all were working on this, weeks would go by where I'd never see you, because I think you were holed up in bunkers planning things. You were traveling around the world, and it's like, what happened to Rosemary or Jill or Tom? Oh gosh, let's see. Oops, I didn't mean to move. I'm scrolling down here to look for our next question. Someone was asking advice for photographers. I'm trying to find that question. Obviously, it's for you, Paul. Scan through here and see if you can find that question. But Paul, tell us a little bit about your thinking in terms of taking pictures of people, give us in a nutshell, what do you try to capture?
Oh, any advice for an amateur photographer? Okay, I just saw that.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to, I go in not knowing what I want to do, because I think the circumstances that people, as Tom will attest to, when we were out on the lake, I only knew a little bit. I think I might have first met you there, Tom. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So, and then I asked him a few questions, and then we started talking, and then it's not just me. It's a combination between myself, the person I'm photographing, and anyone else that happens to be in that environment that I'm in. So being open, I think, is the most important thing, and let your soul guide you of what you think is right. And this, obviously I took more than one photograph, but
yeah.
There's like a little, you hear things, and as you move, it kind of controls and takes a shape of its own, and is the best way for me to describe that.
Thanks for sharing that.
I found the question about the amateur photographer. It's Polly, and she asked, any advice to get great shots like this of elders at home or in our parishes. And I just want to say this is something we tried to encourage when the book came out, that parishes should take pictures, really good, good shots, like call Paul Audia is what they should do. But don't just line up against the wall and take their picture, but try to get good photos of the parishioners, the elders of your parish, and then let them tell their stories on special days in the parish. They should be seen and heard.
Nice. Another question here from Agnes. She says, great presentation, great stories, but she asks, is there something in the book about the wisdom youth can offer the elderly? Or if not, any thoughts about that?
I can
go ahead.
Go ahead, Jill. Or Rosemary? Rosemary, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I think it was interesting. Pope Francis gave some advice during our live presentation, and he said, he invited young people to help carry forward the wisdom, the dreams of elders, and carry out their vision and what they hoped to do. And I thought that was an interesting spin on this, that yes, the elders can guide young people through their lives, but also young people are entrusted with a responsibility to carry forward the dreams that these elders have in these visions. And Tom, you probably can understand that concept better than I can. I'm still mulling it over all these years later, but it was something that reciprocal process between young and old that I thought was a good take from Pope Francis.
Yeah, I think in the book there are young people in every chapter. One person who says, what did I learn from an elder? But in doing that, they're revealing a lot about what they care about and what their desires are in life. And I think I suspect when you and others would come and visit the people at Unbound, I just remember when we would bring our grandchildren, our daughters actually, to see our grandparents, how they would light up, and how there would be some sense of life. And I think that there's, in terms of, I do think it's a mutual thing. It's not just learn from the elders. There's this synergy that happens. And I think the Pope was always talking about your young shall dream dreams, your old men shall dream dreams, and the young shall have a vision.
Yeah.
And it's like the dreams are the synthesized information from a lifetime. And the vision is, here's where I want to go to. The young people don't have that synthesized wisdom yet, but they have that motivation. And I think there's something between the two.
Rosemary,
we listen to each other, we each gain more wisdom for our next task in life.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask Rosemary, and I saw someone asked a question too, but I'm going back to the same thing that I asked Tom. Being in that environment, listening to all these stories, being involved in all this, what one thing did you take away from this?
I think an elder who I got to be good friends with, who's in our work section, Connie Caruso, had a huge impact on me. And she said she wanted me to hear her voice when I first talked to her. She said, "Don't I sound like I'm 35?" And she totally did. And she said, in my head, I'm 86 going on 35.
Oh,
And
wow.
she said, things are in motion, kid. Like the danger is in watching, like keep moving forward, but know that you're being taken care of. Know that. And I think that had the biggest solace and reassurance to me to not watch and to keep moving through life. And she certainly exemplified that. She does stand-up comedy now. She works with former gang members. She's larger than life, read her story in the book. But that one stuck with me.
Well, and Rosemary, as the youngest person on this panel, you did bring a special gift to this, and we're gonna close with giving you the last question. Someone wanted to know, how did you decide what question to ask the Holy Father?
Oh my gosh, that was so hard because this is like, being chosen for Willy Wonka and you get the magic chocolate topper, like how do you decide what to ask? So I think I prayed a lot about it, and I just sat with it for weeks and weeks to see what would come up, and then something just sprung forth. And it stemmed from everything that I had been asking all of these elders about, how do you deal with this uncertainty?
Yeah.
And so it felt true at the time.
That's wonderful. And I can't thank the four of you enough. Tom and Rosemary, Paul and Jill, you did a beautiful job in this book. It is a gift to our church and to our world. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing the time today. I just want to ask if any of you have a closing thought in a nutshell, something you can tell us in about 15 seconds. The floor is yours.
Boy, that's as quiet as it's been since we've been on here. You know what? I'll go ahead and say the one thing that I said earlier is that I learned that there's so much in life, and it's a short life, and do things to help others, and pay attention to history, and don't be angry, and don't hold grudges and animosity towards other people, because it only damages yourself, not the others.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else?
I could just jump in. I think the one big part of this project was that we've talked about is shining a light on elders, and Pope Francis really zeroes in on that in his preface and just says, we've pushed elders aside, and when we do that, we miss the secret that helps us navigate life. And so just during this period of COVID, when a lot of these connections have been broken, it just feels so much even more important to continue forming those connections and forming that learning, because it just will never stop, and what you can learn about yourself and what you can learn from elders and about the world. So I hope this encourages that.
Well, and wiser words we could not find to end on, and coming, as I said, from our youngest person on the panel. And that's, I think, maybe my closing thought too, is, let's always look to our young people for the wisdom that they offer to us, and to encourage them. Wisdom doesn't just show up when you're old. It's something you develop, and let's nurture that in our young people. Again, I can't thank the four of you enough for the wonderful job you did on the book and on this webinar. And I'd like to thank all of our participants who are with us today and who
Joe,
are watching this as a recording.
Joe?
Paul?
I got to thank my wife.
Please do.
She put up with me traveling through. I know Jill and Rosemary did too, but my wife was very instrumental in supporting me throughout this whole thing.
That's
and
wonderful.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. So
thank you for
Bonnie.
sharing that. And I'm sure all of you are thankful to your loved ones for putting up with the pressures. This had a lot of pressure involved with all the traveling and timelines and so on. But thank you to all of our participants. Many people are watching this as a recording. Thank you for checking in on this as a recording. You can find the book, Sharing the Wisdom of Time, at store.loyolapress.com. You can call Loyola Press at 800-621-1008, where you will, during work hours, you will always talk to a live human being in our customer service to place your order. And there's also a QR code on the screen. If you don't know how that works, you take your phone and open it up to camera and place it over that QR code, and it will scan and it'll take you right to the Loyola Press store. And those of you who are watching for the first time live here, a recording will be available so that you can share this with others or watch it again yourself because you want to hear what Tom, Paul, and Jill and Rosemary had to say in a little more detail. But excuse me, thank you all. And
Thanks,
may
Joe.
God bless each one of us. Tom, you want to say the last word?
You know, I was being the old guy on this. I was trying to unmute for about 10 minutes.
Okay. You
But
made it.
I did want to say this. The best advice I would have is don't work with people that drag you down. Work with the very best people. I got the chance to do that in this project. You know, I've gotten to do that with you so many times, Joe. Work with the
Likewise.
people that will bring out the best in you.
Well said, Tom. And on that note, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you. And let's continue to show love to our elders and to bridge that, to build bridges and between our generations. Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you.